I was a girl that woke up in the morning and was like, who am I? What happened to me?
We've talked about the stigma around menopause a little bit. What did you learn, or where do you think that stigma comes from?
One nutritionist has now discovered that list could be closer to 100 symptoms of menopause. But I'm here to say that what I was dealing with versus where I am today is very different. Having doctors that don't agree is why you have to educate yourself. I always hate to hear myself say, you've got to be your own best advocate and trust your gut. And unfortunately, we still do.
How is menopause impacting people of different races and different communities differently?
We haven't seen a movement in a very long time. And I think this is a movement for women.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Liz Moody podcast, where every week we're sharing real science, real stories, and realistic tools that actually level up every part of your life. I'm your host, Liz Moody, and I'm a best-selling author and longtime journalist. Today, I'm joined by Tamsen Fadal, an Emmy Award-winning journalist and anchor. She is followed by millions of people on social media. She's the producer of the incredible PBS documentary, The M Factor, Shredding the Silence on Menopause. And she's the author of the soon-to-be-released book, How to Menopause. Take charge of your health, reclaim your life, and feel even better than before. This episode has tons of pragmatic tips for feeling better in perimenopause and menopause, but it also gets into a lot of the untold truths of this stage of life, including the big lies that we have all been told, like about the link between breast cancer and hormone therapy, and what value women have, and what we have to look like, and what we deserve to feel like, and so much more. I feel like everybody who's been waiting for years to be like, can somebody please talk about this? And now people are finally talking about it, and they're like, oh my God, thank God.
I know, it was like the age was the last thing I wanted to talk about as a news anchor. My gosh.
I'm kind of, at this point, a little bit afraid of perimenopause and a little bit afraid of menopause.
Oh, we got you.
Because people are talking about how awful it is. You hear about all these awful symptoms, which we will get into in this episode. But I'm like, is this a time of my life to dread? And you're like, I feel amazing. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. And look, it came with getting through some of those symptoms. But mentally, I feel like I've really reclaimed my life. I definitely feel like that. I felt like a lot of years of just going on the treadmill, just going, and not sure where I was going. But perimenopause was a time that was rocky because I didn't really know I was in it. I didn't know what I was dealing with, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. Yeah.
Can you tell me your perimenopause story?
Yeah. I got divorced when I was 41. And so I was going through a lot of stress at the time. And everything that happened after that, for maybe the next 4 years, I always said, oh, it's the stress from the divorce. Because that lasts a long time. It doesn't just end when you've signed papers. So I always thought everything was stress, from heavy periods to weight gain that I didn't understand, to being so tired I couldn't get out of bed in the morning, just like listless tired, to not being able to sleep at night, to smelling different. Like I just would sweat, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, is that me? What is going on? Like weird things. I was a news broadcaster for a long time, and I landed on the bathroom floor one night during a show, and I went to doctor, not knowing anything about perimenopause or menopause, and I got a note in my patient portal eventually that said, in menopause, any questions? That was it. And I was like, I can't be in menopause. I'm too young for that. I was 48, of course, like kind of near the average age, but it was quite the journey.
Yeah, it feels like quite the journey. So what did you do? You have this thing that's like, in menopause, I don't know what else to do. And I hear from countless women, my doctor just says, oh, okay, this is menopause. Here's maybe some prescription for some sort of hormone, but I'm not going to do like a deep panel testing. This might not be right for you. And they don't know how to navigate it. So how did you begin to navigate it?
Yeah, they don't know how to navigate it. There are some doctors that do, and I'm so grateful for them. And those are doctors that really have taken the time to learn, because it's not something that many were taught in medical school. And to their own admission, they admit that. What I did when I got that, I went, oh my goodness, I was a journalist for 30 years. And I went, I have to figure something out because I don't really know the right answer. I lost my mother to breast cancer. She was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 44 years old. She died at 51 years old. I had always heard that estrogen caused breast cancer. She had an estrogen-based breast cancer. So for me, I lived under a cloud of breast cancer my whole life. The fear of it, every ache, every weirdness, every anything was that. Every mammogram was just like I wanted to pass out every time I was, getting it. So that was always my fear. I was never thinking about anything else beyond that. When the doctor wrote those 4 life-changing words in my patient portal, I set out to figure out what kind of thing I could do to fix it. And I had no idea all the symptoms. I kind of knew, I think, what everybody else knows. Hot flashes, We've seen them in movies or a little ha-ha. Maybe you don't sleep good at night. Maybe you have mood swings, but I didn't know anything else. I didn't know there's 34 plus symptoms. One nutritionist has now discovered that list could be closer to 100 symptoms of menopause. What I did is try to set out to see what I could do in my lifestyle. What kind of lifestyle changes could I make? And I made as many as I could, but I really had to go back and do my research on hormone therapy because that's what I was scared of. I didn't feel like it was right for me because I had always thought it wasn't until I did enough research and talked to enough people and realized that I was actually doing more harm to myself by not doing it. And so I went on hormone therapy about 2 years ago, and it's been life-changing for me. It's not for everybody, but it's been life-changing for me. And I still make all the lifestyle changes too, because those are super important. But in terms of being afraid, I think what I'm appreciative of now is being able to tell you what those are. So when you have something where you're like, I don't know, I'm like sweaty at night and I feel like I'm not sleeping right, you can go right to the doctor and say, look, I think that I'm seeing some symptoms of perimenopause and I want to start doing something about it now. Because what a lot of us didn't do was have that option because we just didn't know and we just went through it quietly. And that's where the problem, I think, really lies.
And we're going to talk a lot about the different things that we can do, all the action steps that we can take. But I want to talk about your fear of breast cancer because I think a lot of people have those fears around hormone therapy. And I learned from your documentary that that's traced to a very specific source. So can you tell us that story?
Yeah, there was a World Health Initiative in 2002. And it was a big study. And it was a study that was set out to really study something else completely. But what came from that, sadly, is I think one of the worst mistakes I've ever seen in terms of the healthcare system, which was a fear of women getting breast cancer as a result of estrogen and hormone therapy. And we had a lot of doctors in the documentary, The M Factor, that said that were actually practicing doctors during that time. And there was about 40% of women that were going along, plugging along on hormone therapy, taking hormone therapy, doing fine through menopause. The study was halted, by the way. And those findings were announced that scared every woman. If you go into a room of women and you say, what are you afraid of? Heart problems? A few will raise their hand. Sleep problems? A few will raise their hand. Dementia? A few will raise their hand. Breast cancer? You will have more than half the room.
Breast cancer rates are rising generally. Yeah. It's scary.
Yeah, it's very scary. And we all probably know somebody or live with somebody who had the scare or has had breast cancer or has been lost to breast cancer. So that was my scare. And that was what happened after that study. That morning, doctors that were working on both sides of that study were either prescribing or on the other side of it, said their office phones were ringing off the hook. And the rate of women that were doing hormones went from like 40-ish% down to 4% and even lower. Women were afraid. They flushed them down the toilet. They wanted nothing to do with them. Totally different kind of hormone therapy than, what most women are prescribed now. But we never went back and said, hey, wait a minute. Anything else that was done after that to course correct what had happened really didn't have the same kind of hit that did. So as a result, you will say to somebody, I'm on hormone therapy, and they will 9 times out of 10 will say, oh, isn't that dangerous? Does that cause breast cancer? And we don't even know where it came. I mean, we know where it came from, but most people don't even know where they learned that. That was one of the most alarming things that I found for myself because I had such a fear of that. And I understand it. I understand it too well. I lost my stepmother to breast cancer as well, not an estrogen-based, but nevertheless, it's hung over my life for a long time. So I really, really do understand it.
To be completely clear, what does the accepted research at present show about the link between hormone therapy and breast cancer or any scary things like that?
Yeah. The links right now and the research right now shows that if you're going to use hormone therapy, that's going to be the best thing to help with symptoms, right? That's going to be the best thing. Not for everybody. It's not going to be okay for somebody that has an estrogen-based breast cancer. It's not going to be okay for somebody that has a certain type of blood clots. So there are some contraindicators that, you're just not going to be a candidate for. Most people are a candidate for that. The rate of that and what most of the doctors say is that it's not going to be something that triggers a breast cancer. If you have an estrogen-based breast cancer, that's when you would not be taking it. It would not be the cause.
But you, with this strong history of breast cancer in your family, your doctors were like, that does not concern me.
Yes, a family history of it is not a contraindicator. A woman who had it themselves, if I had had it, that would have been something to talk about. Now, what's interesting is a friend of mine just went through breast cancer, and she couldn't get an answer whether or not she could go back on hormone therapy. And so she went back and forth with some doctors, and then there was a doctor that said, listen, it is okay. From the type of breast cancer that you had to where you are today, to how you were treated in your findings, she's able to go on a low dose of hormone therapy. So everybody's case is so different. And I think that's what's confusing. I think it's really what's confusing because what we all want is this answer. That's not going to cause anything. It's fine. But if we go open any kind of prescription medication, we get the litany of all those things. It's just breast cancer does something to women and something to me that is very scary. But I'm here to say that I've been on it for 2 years, and what I was dealing with versus where I am today is very different.
What were you dealing with in a nutshell, and where are you today in a nutshell?
I was a girl that woke up in the morning and was like, who am I? What happened to me? Like, that's how I felt. I was originally put on antidepressants. I was put on Lexapro, and that helped a little bit, but it didn't take away the other symptoms that I was dealing with. And when I had that hot flash and then my heart was racing out of control, and then I was up at night, not sleeping, getting up the next morning exhausted, I was just, you can't catch up. You're in this kind of like cycle. And I think what was the hardest part is that, one, I didn't know what to talk about. It wasn't even that I didn't have anyone to talk about. I didn't know what to even talk about. 5 years ago, nobody was saying the word menopause or perimenopause. I didn't even know what it was. I think the fact that we have women younger and younger hearing the word, getting educated about it, not being afraid of the word, and being able to—
I'm working on that.
I'm going to help you.
That would be, if we have a successful episode, that'll be the conclusion. Yeah.
Because it's not something to fear. It's something to be aware of so that you can deal with it. It really is. And I think that's what I wish I had had. Look, ideally, I wish I'd had my mom to talk to about it. But I wish I'd had anybody to talk to about it, is the truth. I have a younger brother, and so I never had a sister, and I didn't have a mom to talk to about it. And I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so when you're dealing with all those things, you're somewhat playing whack-a-mole with symptoms. And that's what I'm hoping we avoid by going forward with this. It's why we did the doc. We did it so you could have all those things in one place. And so while we named all these different symptoms, where I'm sure some women are like, oh, gosh, that's never going to get better. The truth is knowing that really is half the battle. Like, I didn't understand how important education was in all this. I always thought those were things we say, like, if you're educated about it, it'll be much easier. But I do understand that. I do understand that had I known some of those things, I would have treated them very differently and not suffered all those years. There's no reason for women to be suffering. And that's what I fight against.
I think the struggle in a lot of people's minds is if this is just treating symptoms, but it might have these negative effects. And I say just, but it really shouldn't be just. If this is treating symptoms, but it might have these negative effects, should I just kind of like power through and endure the symptoms if it's not kind of like changing my health in a deeper, more significant way? What would you say to those people?
It's funny because that's what a lot of doctors say. A lot of doctors have said to women, this is a normal part of life. Just power through it. There are long-term health consequences too, though, oftentimes with the depletion of estrogen. And those are some of the things that you want to look for. We're talking about bone health, osteoporosis. We're talking about heart health. And we're talking about brain health. And so when we talk about the bones, the brain, and the heart, like those are long-term things that we want to take care of too. I am the first one to raise my hand and say we need more research on all of it. We need more options on all of it. We need things that all women can take. We can't leave women who have had breast cancer or are not able to take hormone therapy out of this conversation or don't want to, because there are a lot of them. And so I think that that's really why I set out to have a broader conversation about it, because I, for a long time, felt like that person that didn't know if it was okay for me. You don't have to power through it. There are lifestyle changes that you can make, and some are very, very healthy, and there are different supplements out there. But, what we're seeing now is a lot of people just offering a lot of different things. So there's not a one-all cure for anything, but I do believe we're going to get to a place with more noise, more research, and more money that we'll get to a place where we've got some more answers.
Which honestly, maybe that's my light at the end of the tunnel, because I have like a little bit of time before I'm dealing with this stuff. So maybe like the research over the years will make it even better. And your work will catalyze like more conversations that will help me when my time comes.
I hope so. I met a woman yesterday at the airport, and she said, I got thrust into perimenopause early for medical reasons. And thank you, because I didn't know what to expect from it. And I thought to myself, like, that is exactly what I want. Those women that are either like you going to be looking at it down the road, whether it's 5 or 10 years down the road, or women that have been put into it early, to be able to have a few of those answers make a huge difference. But I agree with you. I think the more we're having these conversations, we will see progress be made a lot faster. And I'm really hopeful of that.
What are the ages we're talking about specifically that we should be sort of on the lookout for? Oh, my stress might be because of perimenopause.
I always say early 40s. Some people say late 30s. I think early 40s is really like that zone. I would definitely say that I started seeing my changes at 42, 43, 44. But they were little things. They were just periods would be weird or super heavy or missing for 2 months, and then I would be in a panic like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? I don't have my period for 2 months, so you go back and forth. My sleep and weight and a lot of the brain fog and stuff I experienced were a little bit later on. Brain fog was a big one for me with work. I noticed it more probably than anything that bothered me because I would have a conversation and not be able to finish the rest of the sentence. I wouldn't be able to do this back and forth with you. I would be a little more pausy and a little more pulling for words. I did not give you brain fog. I did not bring it with me.
That's so interesting.
You're so cute.
Like literally my husband.
I caught perimenopause from her.
Okay. One of my friends who's in, I think, her late 40s, early 50s, and she's been navigating perimenopause. And she says the hardest thing is that all of the doctors that she sees disagree with each other on the best course of action. And the functional doctors, the doctors who seem more inclined to help, are incredibly expensive and don't take insurance. Do you have any advice for that?
It's a real problem. The Menopause Society does have a list on their website of certified menopause specialists, which is nice. So you know that they've gone through that extra training. It's also part of the reason we did the film is because we've been able to help educate doctors and nurses and healthcare practitioners with continuing medical educational hours, which is nice because a lot of medical schools don't treat this. Some OBGYNs have gotten less than a month of training in medical school, so they've done a lot of their own work. So that's why she's seeing that problem, first of all. Second of all, it's not okay. And I think that access is what another thing I just get very frustrated by. It shouldn't be just because you can afford to go to somebody that's going to say that they're able to treat this, that those are the only people that should have it. And so that always has worried me about this particular space. The more and more I see it, having doctors that don't agree is why you have to educate yourself. I always hate to hear myself say, you've got to be your own best advocate and trust your gut. And unfortunately, we still do. And I want there to come a time that it's not up to us, that we can go and ask somebody to help us feel better, but you really have to do that at the end of the day. And I think that we as a society are more used to doing that. I think we're more used to learning. Social media has changed the game in so many ways. Podcasts like this have changed the game in so many ways where you can educate yourself on different things.
Books like yours.
Thank you. But you could feel a little more confident walking into the doctor's office. I would say this. I would say know what symptoms you're talking about, know what you are willing and not willing to do, and really understand hormone therapy so you can make that judgment yourself. If you are a candidate for it and you decide you want to do it, or if you decide you don't want to do it, you don't need somebody to tell you how to change your diet and have more protein. You don't need somebody to tell you to move a little bit more. You can make those lifestyle changes. And I think that that's the important part where you'll see a little bit of difference. The part where it's hard is lack of sleep, but the brain fog, those are some of the areas that I think need a little more attention.
Are there questions that you would recommend people go to their doctor with that they might not be asking?
Yeah, absolutely. I said, well, I write scripts for a living, so I have to give people a script to go into the doctor's office with. So I did two things. One is make sure that everybody has a downloadable symptom tracker, especially as you go forward and say, I got dry skin. Okay, I got it. I think that gives you a little bit more power for yourself. And then I think also when it comes to a doctor, I think you have to ask really questions that are a little bold and probably not comfortable. If you've got an OBGYN you've been with for 20 years or however long, and they've delivered your children, you might not feel like you want to question them, right? That's not always very comfortable, but I think it's necessary. And I think it's, do you feel comfortable treating women in menopause? How do you feel about hormone therapy? How do you feel about recommending certain supplements to me? When should I be looking at this? And when are you willing to help me make sure I alleviate the symptoms? Or are you just going to tell me I need to push through it? I mean, those are some big ones. You have to drill down a little bit on some of the different tests. Is there a bone density test you should be looking at? Should you be talking about your heart? I wish that we had what we do for mammograms, which is that baseline. If we had a baseline for women during this time, I think we'd have a lot less confusion. You could go to a blood test today and have one level of your hormones because you're still not in perimenopause. And you could go in 2 weeks and you could have another level of your hormones because they fluctuate. Once you hit menopause, that's a whole different story. You're going to be kind of not, you don't have that in menopause 365 days after your last period. But, there are some different tests that you're going to want to do so you can make sure other parts of your body stay healthy. And so I think that that's important too. I think that you want to make sure that the bone is probably one of the most important out of everything.
And you said that hormone therapy can actually help with some of these underlying health issues, so not just symptom management.
So that's some of the research that's still being done. Symptom management is what that's for in certain symptoms. And the Menopause Society actually kind of doubled down on a statement that they said recently because they didn't want people to think that hormone therapy was just going to prevent a bunch of different things, like prevent this, prevent that, because that's not really what it's for. What it's doing is actually putting more estrogen and progesterone back into your system, or testosterone, if that's what your body needs. So I think it's important to note that we do need to know more. We just named these 34 symptoms. We've just named additional ones. You're seeing a lot of different pharmaceutical companies coming out now with different kinds of hot flash medicines. It's expensive, but some are non-hormonal, and that's what people want to hear. They want to hear that there are different options out there, but the only way we're going to get there is more money being dumped into it.
And I also hate, I've said it twice now, I've said just symptom management.
I know.
And I hate that that's where my brain goes, because symptoms are important. And there's
they are.
hundreds of thousands of women out there who don't feel like they can live their best lives right now because of these symptoms. And the fact that I and society at large, which is where I've learned this from, are so diminishing of like, oh, just like, it's fine. It's just like a little hot flash. What are you complaining about?
Yeah. That's the part that I think got me very frustrated. I looked around in workplaces because I realized that there's so many women of these ages that are at the height of their career, or they're starting new companies, or they're entrepreneurs, or they're on their third business, or they're writing their fifth book. And they've got all this like wisdom now and power, and, they've earned their stripes. They just like got it. And then they're tackling some of these things. And I think to myself about the women that just did power through it, right? And maybe they were our bosses, and we'd be like, she's really got a bad attitude. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, what was she going through? Or what was going on? So I'm grateful that we have that awareness, whether it's at home or whether it's in the workplace. I always say that when I wrote my book, it was like the bedroom, the boardroom, and beyond, because I think that we get hit with all those things, and it is not okay. We should not have to be quiet about that. We should not have to power through, and we shouldn't be penalized because we go through this transition. And that's the bigger thing that I think we do have to be aware of.
Yeah, tell us about, there were some really cool stories about workplaces that were making accommodations for menopause. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, I would love to. I always want to give them so many kudos because it's such a new thing. When I was working with the media company I was with, and it was several years ago now, I went into my HR department and I said, I just heard the UK had menopause workplace policies at Channel 4 in the UK. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's a woman in charge. She did this. We need this. So I walked in, not understanding. I mean, how many layers you have to go through to like implement policy. And I said, can we get a menopause policy? The poor woman I talked to, she was the head of HR, and she's like, what does that look like? And I go, I don't, like, there's a lot of stuff to it. Here's a bunch of them. So I did my research. I brought all this stuff printed out. Poor thing, I had it everywhere. She's showing attorneys. So this is relatively new in a lot of cases, but there are some different businesses that are really taking control of this and saying, like, if these women need help and we want to retain this workforce, and we do for so many reasons, we want to have an intergenerational workforce. That makes things really nice. That makes conversations nice. That makes output nice.
And like you said, these are women who are peak. Like they have accumulated all this incredible wisdom and knowledge over the years. Yeah. These are the people you want in your workplace.
100%. They've got that wisdom, and I do think that there's something to those relationships and how they work that's really special and really important. So there are a lot of companies that are standing up, paying attention, finding ways to support women, whether it's, having educational seminars. Really what they want to know is, how do we give our women support? Now, does that mean they get certain days off? Does that mean that paid time off comes with, going outside and taking a break? There's some suggestions of like having a fan at your desk. Is there a way that you have a cooling room? Like, I don't know that that's what every place is going to do. We have people that work driving to being in schools and classrooms, to being in an office, to being out on the road. So we have so many different types of workplaces. It's hard to say like, this is what a policy looks like.
There was one, I think in the book or the documentary, that gave people access to experts who could help with this stuff. And I thought that, I was like, that's just huge. Like such a low-hanging fruit to provide people with people who can help.
It is. It's the support part. It's the community part. And then the next part is like, do we have nurse practitioners or some type of telehealth that we can provide people? Because I agree with you. That's low-hanging fruit to be able to have that kind of retention in the workforce.
What else surprised you when you were making this documentary. It's so much about like the hidden truth of menopause that we need to reveal. What shocked you?
What shocked me more than anything else was, I guess, two things. I guess one, the lack of education with the doctors, which is a reason that we wanted this documentary not just to be a film, but to be an educational tool. That was a big one. And then, I just didn't realize that menopause impacted, different races and different communities so differently. And that was a large part of this conversation. And it's one that really is lacking in so many areas and needs to have, again, we keep going back to the same words. We need more research. We need more dollars. We need more conversation about it. Because up until recently, we were not having the conversation. And we have to get into communities that aren't having that conversation. And the truth is you and I can sit here and have it, and we can have it with, with 10 different people, and 10 different people will tell 10 different people. But there are still people that are not comfortable having the conversation at all. And so whether they're getting their information from a doctor that might not be comfortable treating menopause, or they just don't have anyone to talk to, those are the women that we want to reach.
How is menopause impacting people of different races and different communities differently?
Black women oftentimes, and this is according to research, go into it a little bit earlier and it lasts a little bit longer. It can be more intense. And that was something that I had known before going into the documentary, but probably not as much. With Latina women, it's not talked about as much, and that's a really big deal because we've seen through a number of different surveys that community is a huge part of this. And when these women feel alone, that's when problems happen because they don't have anybody to discuss it with.
Something that shocked me in the documentary were the positive, literal physical benefits of menopause. I think Lisa Moscone talks about the brain benefits. I'd never heard that before. Can you share a little bit about that?
I'd love to. Yeah, I think I worship her. she's really,
so cool.
She's so cool and just really brilliant, really humble about her work, but has made incredible strides when it comes to, she's a neuroscientist, made incredible strides when it comes to Alzheimer's, especially with women, but she turned to menopause as part of what she was doing with all of that research. It always stands out in my mind. It's probably what you're talking about is kind of like this curve of a chart, which it starts out when you're here and you're kind of before perimenopause, and then you dip, and then some women come like right back up to where they were or pretty close. And then, some women kind of like average out right below that line. But it's kind of where you start to see what a lot of people call the happiness curve in a different part of your life, and a little more boldness and a little sexier, and a little just feeling like, okay, I've got this now. And I think that that's inspiring. And that's what we wanted with that film. We didn't want people to walk away like, oh gosh, what? I don't want you to do that. I wanted people to walk away and go, hey, I got that. I want to learn more about it, but at least I start to understand some of it, and I know what I can go in there and have something actionable to do with my doctor.
We've talked about the stigma around menopause a little bit. What did you learn, or where do you think that stigma comes from?
Oh, gosh. It comes from a long time and a lot of history. When women age, traditionally, we have thought of them as kind of expired and not as relevant as they were in the past, and a little invisible, and maybe not quite at their game, right, when they were 20 years old. And that's just kind of how society has treated it, and culturally we've been, and we're past our reproductive years, not quite as useful. And sadly, that's really why when every time we say menopause, we're like, oh, the word has been taboo for a long time. And I said a few years ago, if I could never hear the word taboo again when it comes to menopause, because it's so frustrating. Like, again, these are women that are at their peak oftentimes, have a few symptoms to deal with. And remember, everyone doesn't get all those symptoms. Like, everybody has something a little bit different. One of my friends, all she ever had was dry skin, and like her hair was really brittle. I had a whole bunch more than she did. So everybody comes by it a little differently. But I think that has been through the years. Women were called hysterical way, way back when they were dealing with a lot of these symptoms. So we didn't have research. We weren't part of a lot of medical studies until the mid-90s. We weren't required to be, which is
insane.
Can you imagine that?
No, it's
Can you imagine
insane.
we were walking around the world like, oh,
like dosages of medications, surgeries, anesthesia, like the implications of that are wild. And that's outside of health issues that impact women specifically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you look at women's health and you look at what's designated for all these areas, and then menopause, Dr. Sharon Malone was like, you can barely even find the money that is spent to look at that area. So there's been 4 different bills right now that have been presented, and I'm hopeful that something moves through and really reaches the right level where we can see some type of return, because we are seeing it. We are seeing some more research done. We are seeing more conversation. We're seeing pharmaceuticals pay attention. When people start to see the money, they start to pay attention. And that's unfortunate, but fortunate in terms of the fact that hopefully this gets the right attention so we can get more women answers. 4% of women that are on hormone therapy as one of their solutions. What are the other 96%? What are their solutions?
It's still 4%? I thought that was just in reaction to the faulty study.
No. It's still very, very low. There was one, it was depending on the demographic, and it was like 1.8%, but it was a certain demo of women. But yeah.
And I just think it's so important to note that the shame women have around this is really rooted in misogyny, and it's really rooted in once you are out of your reproductive years, we don't think that you have use anymore in society on this like very deep rooted level. And you have so many uses. Have you heard about killer whales in menopause?
Oh yeah, of course.
I think it's so the story with killer whales, I literally learned this on like a whale tour.
Yeah. On a whale tour.
But then I have since like validated it. It was just like one of my favorite facts. But killer whales.
I interviewed you for my whale part of the book.
They go through menopause, and one of the reasons for that is because they need as a species to pass on their wisdom and knowledge. That is how this species functions. And I just think there's something so beautiful around the mammals that go through menopause, which is not very many. It's a very teeny sector of mammals, and we are one of those mammals, need to pass on our wisdom. That's why menopause exists. That's why we don't drop dead, essentially, after we reproduce.
Yes. Yeah, once your ovaries are not functioning anymore the way, for the reason of reproduction, that's it? Like, that's not it. I agree with you, and hopeful that in time, that's what we start to see. And I actually think we're starting to see it. I don't want to say in time. I think we're actually starting to see that. We're starting to see women speak up. We're starting to see major voices, thought leaders, celebrities come to the forefront saying like, listen, yes, I'm in menopause, or hey, I was really worried about aging in front of the camera or in front of my bosses, or hey, I'm doing really great, even though I went through that, or even though I'm this age, 50 plus, or I'm getting remarried. There's a lot to this time, and not a lot has been shown to younger people to look forward to.
There's a lot of like, oh, once I don't look a certain way, and I think there's something really beautiful about all of these women being able to come into their power. They're essentially not weighed down. And I think that, obviously having kids is a really beautiful thing and it changes a lot of people's lives. But to be out of your reproductive years, to not have to menstruate every single month and deal with the litany of symptoms that come with that, to not be rearing children probably, it's this really beautiful, empowering time in a woman's life. And I just love seeing this whole group of women taking that back.
Yeah, I really do too. It's this new season, right? It's a different season. And I'm excited about it. And I really hope that it has its mark. I really do. I don't think, a lot of people are like, oh, menopause is having a moment. I don't think it's a moment. Like, I think that this is actually, we haven't seen a movement in a very long time. And I think this is a movement for women.
Do we know what makes perimenopause and menopause different for different people? You mentioned there's some race-based components that they're just beginning to uncover. But do we know why some people have some symptoms, why it's so bad for some people and it's not as bad for other people?
Some of the research has showed different things if somebody's been a smoker, if somebody's diet, but I don't know that there's been anything that's just this hard and fast place to go and say, like, if you do this, you're not going to have hot flashes or night sweats, and if you do this, you are. We know little things like, not little, but, if you caffeine and alcohol are going to intensify your hot flashes. Like, it's almost obvious. But you're not thinking about that in your mid-40s or your early 40s. I wasn't. I was going out after work. I was doing the news. I'd go have a drink, and then I wouldn't be able to sleep all night long. I think that we still don't know enough, and that's the big problem.
Let's talk about some symptoms. Loss of libido is the number one that I have heard of.
Yes.
And one person described it as like, just I can get my mind there sometimes, but like my physical body does not want to have sex anymore, but I want to have sex. So are there any interventions that have been shown to help?
There's real things, and there's a lot of them. I actually did a larger part of my book about this because I got remarried at 50 years old. And so I was like, oh gosh, I was a menopausal bride looking back at that. I had just, come kind of through perimenopause, and then I hit menopause, and I was like,
are they after each other? That's maybe a silly question, but is it like you're in perimenopause until you're in menopause?
Yeah, perimenopause is like these random chaotic years. It's like hormone chaos.
Which you say, again, is like it's worse than menopause for a lot of people.
Well, I think that those are like the symptoms of like your period's super heavy, your period's not there anymore. You've still got your hormones going, up, down, all over the place. So if you went one day, you'd get a test and it would be, your level would be here, and the other time would be here. That's why doctors don't recommend getting a blood test to find out if you're in perimenopause. I think Dr. Sharon Malone says it best, but she's like, if you're here to here in your age and you're having these symptoms, you're probably in perimenopause. And I went, oh, that's so true. Like,
So it's diagnosed by symptoms?
By your symptoms. That's why that tracker I found to be something that was just really simple. But I think nowadays we need simplicity sometimes, and check them off. You don't need to bring it to your doctor, but you can see what those things are, so you know that could be something. Lack of libido is a big one.
So you were a new bride, and you were dealing with all these hormone things and wanting to have like hot sex with your husband, I assume.
Yes, I did have to work at different things. Like, I did start testosterone, and that was something that took a long time for me to do because I was very nervous about it. I knew that there was nothing that was really for women. I wasn't sure. I thought I could like get through it, but sex can be painful too. And that's part of the problem. That's part of what comes with the lack of estrogen. So there are a lot of different types of things that you can use in different lubes, and those things are helpful. And there's vaginal estrogen, which is helpful. There's a campaign right now to get this black box label off of it because that is available for everyone to use. It doesn't matter what the contraindicators are. That's available for everybody to be able to use. I really had to focus on my sex life. It had to be a little bit different for me. Like, I had to pay attention to it and not just assume it was going to happen like that. I had to like take time, and I had to put time aside or have a date night and have it be a little more sensual and talk about it. And that wasn't anything I was used to because I was like, I have time to talk. Let's just have sex. So that did change for me, but I'm grateful that I paid attention to it because at first, I was like, oh, I guess it's just what happens when you get older and you're just not interested anymore. And the more I researched and studied and read and paid attention to things, I was like, wait a minute. Some people that are older are having like the best sex of their lives. What is going on here? Like, now we know what it's supposed to feel like. And this is a time that we're like not feeling good about it. So yeah, I had to make changes. I really had to make changes.
You think it's possible though, from your personal experience, to have the best sex of your life as you get older?
I'm not 20. But yeah, I'm having great sex.
Okay.
But I do think it's possible. I know it is.
Because that's another thing that really scares me. I'm like, are these the best sex years of my life and it's all downhill from here?
No. I promise no.
Okay.
The whole reason we're talking is so it's game changing right now, and not so it scares people into being silent again. And I think that that's what's the most important thing out of anything that I can say or I can impress upon anyone younger than me. Like, I think to myself, oh my gosh, you're so lucky that you know what's going on so you can like handle it right away. You're not suffering, worse. I think that that's important.
Is there anything you would do in your 30s outside of accumulate knowledge to have a better perimenopause or menopause?
Yeah, I'd pay attention to sleep, which I like blew off and thought I could get away with 4 hours of sleep every night, and I was a superhero and could do it. I worked early morning news.
I know broadcast journalists are a whole different breed.
It was. I was like, how did I function? I don't know. Sleep, I'd pay more attention to how I ate versus trying to be. I was on a treadmill all the time, like trying to sweat it all off. Like I ate, I sweat it all off the next day. I wish I hadn't done that to my body. Like I really screwed with my body quite a bit, and I hate that.
What would you do instead in terms of exercise?
Oh, I'd pay attention to food as like nourishment and what I do now, and like really see the reason for everything, and pay attention to protein, which I thought was like, protein's got too many calories. Everything that I did was like this. It was just wrong. Even
weight
with
training,
the workout,
I imagine.
Even with the workout, yeah, I was on the treadmill, an hour a day, just pumping away at the whatever. I do weight training now 3 days a week, yoga. Those are walking. I thought walking wasn't a workout. I know anything but. I walk every single day of my life now. I think I'd have more respect for people who are older than me. I think I would pay attention to the people that were around me and learn from them a little bit more. I think I would do that differently too.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
I think that's what I would do.
Talk to me about the testosterone a little bit, because we talked about hormone therapy, which does hormone therapy universally just mean any types of hormones you're putting on or in your body?
I put those 4 things into the category, right? So there's different types of estrogen. I have an estrogen patch. I have progesterone, which I take at night, which is great. It helps me my sleep in a big way. And testosterone is for lack of libido. And, I think that it's just helped me in different energy ways. And then vaginal estrogen is another one.
How do you take testosterone? Is it like a shot?
So my testosterone, no. It's just a cream.
Okay.
There's different ways to do it. Like some people have like little packets that Dr. Kelly Casperson showed, and they look like ketchup packets. I think that was complicated for me. So mine's like a pump, and it just pumps out like the right amount. And so it pumps out just one tiny small pump, and I put it on one shoulder one day and I put it on the other day, or you can put it like in between, on your thighs.
And I think that scares a lot of women because they're like, isn't that the
men.
male hormone.
Yeah. Isn't that going to
Am I
make me big?
Like, yeah.
No, it's a tenth of the dose of a man's because we don't have our own because we're just women. And
but we
don't
have
our own.
testosterone before perimenopause and menopause.
Of course we do. Of course we do.
Which I think, I mean, honestly, a lot of women don't know. It's so associated with like that is the male hormone.
It is. That's for guys, and we're over here. No, we do. And so that 1/10 of a dose is a tenth of a male's dose. And, there's been so much, ongoing trying to, get women their own, because like, how could we not? How could we be in 2024 and not? It just doesn't make any sense. But that was a game changer for me too. I took a long time to do it. I've been on it about a year now, and I did see a significant difference.
In libido specifically?
In libido specifically.
Is there anything else that it's kind of indicated for?
I don't know. I feel like it's helped with like my muscle tone a little bit, but just like I was having a really tough time. And it could have been for a number of different reasons, but I was having a tough time, I felt like, with my muscle. I feel like I used to go to the gym and be like, oh, I worked out twice. I can already see tone. And then I stopped seeing that. And now I feel like I see it a little bit better, but it's, I don't have my 20-year-old body, but I don't think about that very often. I don't go back and look at pictures and be like, oh, I miss her. I really am happy where I am. And I was never somebody that said that. Never.
What was that shift for you?
And how can I have it? I've been thinking about it a lot. I'm going to give it to you. I'll give you that. I will not give you perimenopause or menopause. I think I started realizing what's important during this time. Like I've really paid a lot more attention to myself, my body, my mind, who I am, what I do with my time, who I talk to, who's in, who's out, my boundaries, what's important, what's not, what's BS, what we fight for and do every single day. For example, 5 years ago, if we were talking, I'd have been like, oh yeah, it's great. I'm just going to check my phone. And I'm going to be over here. And how much I would have been doing 20 things in my mind. And today I'm just here with you. Like I don't even know anything else that's going on around here. I think that really has made me happier. I think it's made me feel more at peace. I wouldn't say content. I don't know that I'm content ever. I want a lot. I desire a lot. I want like us to change history. I want us to change how women are seen. Like there's so much I want to do right now. I accidentally fell into the menopause world. I don't know how, but I'm so happy with where I am that I really had this thought. And I said it to my friend and I was like, don't hold me to this because I'm not trying to be like but like I never want this time to end. And that's a cool feeling to be at versus what's next. And 3-4 years ago, I was saying, what's next? What's next? What am I doing next? Now what? Now what? And I don't feel like I'm saying that right now.
What about on a physical level, though? Like, I think a lot of women struggle with, my body doesn't look the way it did 10 years ago. My face doesn't look the way it did.
Of course.
How have you done?
I have it all. I aged in front of a camera. And I aged in front of a camera with viewers' comments that would come in and be like, please cover up your knees. You're too old to show your knees. And yeah, that was literally an email to our news desk. Not about the story I covered that night, not about the, I was always acutely aware, or I always thought skinny equaled success, youth equaled my career, longevity, and anything else was going to be failure. That's what I thought in my head. And I don't know where it came from. I think it came from society, quite frankly. I think it came from, sadly, I had a grandmother that always wanted me to be little and, fit into little things. Like that wasn't
because
who I
was trying to protect you. Like that's what I think is such an interesting thing is that generation was like, oh, these are the things that society is rewarding.
Yes.
I need to have my children, my grandchildren be rewarded. And then they mentally like screw us up forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
And I still always remembered. I always, she was like, don't eat pizza. And every time I eat pizza, I'm like, I'm eating it. So I know my body's changed. I know my face has changed. I know that my hair has changed. I know that my knees have changed. Thanks to that viewer out there. I feel good about who I am in here. And so I see it, but I don't see it. Like I'm not focused on it in a crazy way. Would I like, my whatever, my elbow to not feel like so rough that I'm like, what in the world is going on here? Sure. Would I like me not to have wrinkles and like have these crease marks all the time? Yeah. But when I see women that own that stuff, I think they're like way more beautiful. Yeah. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Like I'm like, oh, you are it. I really like that.
And then you mentioned 4 different types of hormones, right? Do they all map to sort of different symptoms? Like you mentioned, testosterone typically maps to libido.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so the lack of estrogen is what we see with all of those different symptoms we're talking about. When we talk about hot flashes, when we talk about dry skin, we talk about hair. Estrogen is like moisture in your body when you feel, dry everywhere, all over your body. So that's like the estrogen.
Are most women benefiting from estrogen? Like, is that one that is a staple in the
Yes, we
recommendations?
can't do that alone. So you've got to do estrogen and progesterone together.
Okay.
So yeah, testosterone is different, vaginal estrogen different. So those two are coupled together. And so I think what I realized when I started progesterone is I was sleeping very, very differently. Like I would, and I've heard that from a lot of women. My friend that I was telling you about that had breast cancer that had go off hormones completely. She was like, I just want the progesterone. That's all. Like that helped me sleep.
Can you do progesterone on its own? Because you said estrogen has to be done with progesterone.
Yeah,
Is it
I don't
vice
think you
versa?
can do that on its own.
Okay.
I don't think you can do that on its own.
Can you do testosterone on its own?
I don't know about that. I mean, I would assume you can, but
usually,
I don't know.
Though, if you're going to the doctor, are they
But
kind of
usually
like
if you're doing, they're
making
doing
you a
those two.
cocktail?
They usually do those two. So what happened to me, I'll tell you my experience. My experience was originally, I had somebody that said like, do them all together, do everything. And I was scared of that. And then I had somebody say like, tough it out and you're going to be okay. And then I had somebody say, the first person was antidepressants. So I had what you were saying your friend had, all sorts of mixed things. So I went a little slower because that was what was comfortable for me. And I said estrogen and progesterone, those are the two. I want to just see where I go from there. And I stayed on my antidepressant because I didn't know what was what at that point. And I added testosterone in probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years later. That's kind of where I went with that because I, like so many people, was like, I don't need all that. But I did add that on. And then with vaginal estrogen, I'm probably not as good about it as I should be, but I should be doing it, all the time because that dryness is like, can be painful.
So those last two are for essentially sex via libido and then sex via a physical
feeling. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Is there anything else that helps with that lack of sleep other than perimenopause? That's another symptom I hear about a lot.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I almost think that's one of the worst ones for a couple of reasons. One is because you can barely deal with your next day. Then your mind starts feeling funky, and then you don't know if it's brain fog or exhaustion. Then you're going to find caffeine. Then you're going to find some sugar so you can like pick it up for a little bit. So it's almost, then you don't want to go work out. So I feel like that was a vicious cycle for me. And I just felt like the lack of sleep was a big problem. And it was one that I also focused on. It was really awful for me, even as somebody who did pretty good without too much. I never did 8 hours of sleep until recently. I did a couple of different things with that. Magnesium has been huge for my sleep, and I think we hear that a lot. I wasn't convinced of it. I am aware now, though, that I do it, and I do it every night. Going to bed at the same time as much as possible and getting up at the same time have been kind of key to me. I used to think that was just nonsense, but I have seen a big difference with that. So I set my alarm every day for 6:45. I have my clothes laid out like, the cartoon where you jump into your clothes. Like that's literally what I do. I jump into this like all black workout outfit and I hit the park. I go outside and I see sun the first minute of every day. Then I think I'm like a little tired by the time I go to bed. Look, we can all say, turn off your screens and all that stuff. I'm not perfect about that. I wish I were. I wish I could say to you, like, that's what I do. I don't. If I can't sleep, though, I do get out of bed right away. Dr. Shelby Harris told me that, and I had never heard of that before. But she's like, get out of bed. Do not sit there and try to like listen to a meditation app and just fall asleep. Just get out of bed and get out of that environment and then go back in and try to fall asleep. I thought that was pretty good advice.
And the reason for that's from CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And the reason for that is because then we associate our bed with being restless and awake.
Miserable,
and we're sort of training our brain to be like, oh, this is the place I toss and turn and stress out.
Yes.
And if you get out of it, then you're not leaving those associations in your bed.
But I love that, right? So, because I did a lot of the tossing and turning.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
100%. Are there any other lifestyle factors that you wish more people knew about?
Stress plays a big part in all of this. And I just always think that's such an 30,000 feet word. And so I never know where to tell somebody like your stress and my stress are going to be totally different ones. But I do think that there's something to that. And I do think that this is a time, without using all the puns of pause and everything, I do think it's a time that you have to take care of yourself. I do think it's a time where you have to say, I have spent a lot of time focusing on everybody else, and I have to put myself front and center at least for a little while. Because I think if you don't do that, you're not helping yourself at all, and you're not helping anybody else. And then what's the purpose at the end of it all? I just think that I look at these as kind of our someday that we've been saying for a long time. Like someday I'm going to do this. Someday I'll pay attention. I just don't think we can make that a luxury. I think you have to take that time.
Have you had, I don't know the right way to put it, like existential fears or existential awakenings around you're like, we don't have enough time to say someday around this anymore.
Yes.
Like, how do you deal with that part of aging?
Yeah. I mean, I do because, I lost my mom when she was 51, so I never had a roadmap past 51. So when I turned 52, I was like, what? How much longer do I have?
Yeah.
That even though my father's 84, losing your mother is a different, it's just very different. And so I think that I've always had that. I've had that since I was very young. I think I try to do the best that I can. I think I worry about other people more than myself, which is probably, how I deal with it. But I do have that fear. I do have the fear of how many more Christmases do I have? How many more, I do think about those kind of things. But then I think it brings me back to what I was saying before, is that I feel really appreciated in these moments because we're not going to have this moment, ever again. And when you think of it like that, it really does put a lot of things in perspective. A lot of the garbage that we worry about and panic about and think we have to do.
Well, and the body stuff even, or the face stuff that we talked about. It's like,
right.
If this is...
To what end?
If I only have so many Christmas parties left, I think about this too, even at my age. There's a really beautiful line in The Sheltering Sky that's like, how many more times will we see the full moon rise? It might be a dozen, it might be 30, but we act like it's infinite.
Yes.
And we do that with so many things in our lives. We act like it's infinite and it's not infinite. And if we can realize that it's not infinite, it can be a little scary at first, but that fear, I think, can propel us into a different frame of thought.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it almost gives me a sense of peace. There's a peace that comes with it where I'm like, okay, so now I know, and I'm excited about every time I see it, every time I experience it, because I've seen finite. I know what finite looks like. All of us have one way or another. I do think that that's where I become appreciative during this time. Look, I left a career, almost 30-year career that I never thought I'd leave, that I fought every day for, that I missed a lot of holidays for, that I didn't see my family for. And I was petrified when I walked out the door. Like, who am I now? I don't know who I am. And I somehow have found real people in my life, and I think people that are going to be in my life for a long time, that are making change with me and that are trying to help women in this right way. And it feels really amazing. It feels really amazing.
So other than the peace that you find from grappling with the nature of existence, what are your other stress relieving practices?
Yoga, I love. I started doing yoga when I was going through my divorce, and it was the only time I could go into a room, shut the door. And I took this little class at Crunch Studios. That's where I started my yoga practice. It was very basic. And I would shut my phone off, turn it over, and it would be the only time I had that peace for 1 hour. And I felt so good. And at the end, I'd just be like, oh my gosh, I had ideas and thoughts. And so yoga has always been that for me. And then my morning walk is a big deal. So I do an hour and a half by myself most of the time. I just take that time to think and focus and get rid of and de-stress a little bit. I'm not great at meditation. I've tried it. I get better, I think, a little bit every day. I haven't conquered that yet, so I couldn't teach anybody how to do that. I do think that time with my family is super important because my dad is older now, and I'm grateful he's here, so I took him to Spain earlier this summer, so travel is a big part of that.
It's so interesting. In my community, we do these things called circ walks, which is just like circadian rhythm walks. We go outside for 10 to 15 minutes first thing in the morning, and it has all these benefits on your body because the vast, vast, vast majority of your cells, I think 99% of your cells, are on this clock, which is dictated by light exposure. And I've never looked into it in menopause specifically, but it does have a very large impact on your hormones generally. So I actually wonder if it would have a significant impact on your menopausal hormones.
Maybe it does, because I will tell you, I have been doing it for a while now, and it feels different. It feels, I sleep better at night. I wake up easier in the morning, which are two nice things, right?
Yeah,
They're both
so
things
important.
we dread oftentimes.
In your dream world, if you could wave a magic wand and change something about menopause in this country,
let me.
What would you do?
I would make women not afraid of it and make it feel like it's normal and get rid of that word taboo, because that would mean we've done a lot of things. Because that would mean we have educated doctors. It would mean we've educated women. It would mean we've educated men in workplaces and society that has felt that these women were not relevant. And I would want people to see those women as just so relevant and so important and so, at the peak.
What's coming down the pipeline? What can we be excited about in the future of menopause?
Well, I'm excited about a lot of the new studies that are happening regarding different kinds of pharmaceuticals that are out there, because I think that that's important to just see where that happens. I think it's also important to see the research in the supplement world, because I want to see women that are dealing with breast cancer be part of this conversation, because I feel like oftentimes they're really left out of it. And I have a allegiance to that in so many different ways. I also think that we're going to see some changes made in terms of what we're looking at. We talk about testosterone. There's nothing for women right now. We've talked about this money. I think we're going to see some big changes in that. I think we'll see more people come forward and talk about it. There's been different things that say, like, there's different ways to delay it or to postpone it. I don't know what that looks like. I'm not smart enough to know what that looks like. But I think I'm smart enough to know that if women are talking about it in force like this right now, there's going to be change.
Oh, the last thing I want to touch on is you mentioned brain fog. And I know that's another just like huge symptom that a lot of women experience. What's helped you the most with that?
I guess I would probably say more sleep has helped me a little bit with that. I'm positive about that. Hormone therapy helped me with it for sure. I hate to always go back to that, but it did make me feel like I was getting regulated in a lot of different areas. So I don't know if it specifically pinpointed that, but for some reason I started feeling that dissipate. It's also been a number of years now, though, since, I've been in menopause. So I feel like I'm in that other part of Dr. Lisa Mosconi's, peak, which is coming back up here, which feels really good because I was getting nervous for a while. I was feeling like, oh gosh, is this always going to be this way? I did start doing puzzles. I did start doing crossword puzzles. I did all these things that I would never do before. I'm like, I don't have time for a crossword puzzle. I'm working. Are you crazy?
Like you were just trying to preserve that brain connection?
I was like, I need to do the New York Times crossword puzzle. And I get like 3 answers. I'm like, okay.
There's nothing that makes me feel like my brain is not working adequately than trying to do the New York Times crossword puzzle. I'm like, wait, am I dumb? Like, have I been dumb my whole life and not known?
I read all 15 of those things. I don't know any of them. No, that was way before brain fog for me.
Okay, so we have, so you feel like the hormone therapy and then also just kind of like
just the time, I think, giving coming back up on the other side. Yeah, it's coming back up on the other side, because I will tell you that I would be working or I would be in a meeting or I'd just be having a conversation. I would be like, that feeling where you can't remember, and then you're like nervous, and it would be this whole cycle. And I remember it very, very well. And it was uncomfortable and it knocked my confidence, and that sucked. And so I remembered it well. I do other things though. I do label. I do a lot of like these little things that I consider my little tricks just to make sure everything's good. So like I label a lot of stuff all around my house all the time.
Do you have a message that you want men to hear?
Yeah, I do. Well, one, thank you if you have been supporting and are paying attention to and aware of any woman in your life that's going through menopause or perimenopause. And 2, get educated. Like, know what it is. It's not a woman thing. It's something that you're going to be dealing with. You have a mom, you have a sister, you have somebody you work with, you have somebody that you talk to, live with, or married to, sleep with, whatever it is, are friends with, see in the store with, and they might be going through something. So be aware.
Would you start with your documentary or your book, or just like based on your learning style? Where would you start?
I'd start with open conversations with whoever, you have that's close to you, because I think that there's a comfort level there. I was really impressed with anytime I've gone to talk about it, I will have 1 or 2 guys be like, hey, I think my girlfriend's going through something right now. Like, I want to talk to her about this. What should I do? So some guys are willing to learn, and I think that's amazing. Like, I'd love for them to start with the book, because the book is a how to menopause. It's just, you can look at the table of contents and see what you need to know for a woman. But I think the documentary's got some real
You could watch it together.
Hard facts. And you can watch it together. Yeah. And there was one woman wrote to me and she said, we had date night Friday night and we watched the doc. And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I love that. I'm picturing the guys who's like, oh, my girlfriend might be in menopause. Like, that just feels like a nerve-wracking conversation because you're also like, what if they're not? And I've like deeply offended them. And like, because again, there's like stigma around these things. Have you found anything that like worked for you? Or other women
with regard to
like
how they go back and forth with that,
with attributing things to your hormones without feeling like you're opening the door for people to always be like, well, are your feelings not valid anymore because it's just a result of these hormones?
Well, and that's what I was saying before. We don't want women to start being penalized for that, because that always worries me. You know, I don't want somebody to be like, oh gosh, she's going to be through this for 5 years. So I don't want that to happen. And I think we're so new in this conversation, and that's a scary part and an exciting part, because I think that we can kind of direct the narrative.
So what would you say to a woman, to a man about that? How to attribute the very real feelings that your hormones are giving you without having everything you're feeling be invalidated because it's like because of your hormones.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have an open conversation with them because it is in some ways, but it's not everything. Everything is, sometimes I'm just irritated. It's not because I'm menopausal.
Right.
It's not, it's just not. And sometimes I have rage and it's not because of that. Look, I think we all have our different personalities and I think we all have different little tics and things. I think somebody that knows you or cares enough about you is going to pay attention to that. But you're right. We don't want it to be like, oh, it's that talk. That's not that. She's not really that upset, or that doesn't really negate what we're feeling. And I think you have to talk to your partner about it. I do. It's a hard conversation. I don't think it's easy. I did a letter to my husband and I posted it because I was like, this is what I think I would have wanted to say back then to Ira, because it wasn't him. It was what I was going through, but I also didn't want everything to be blamed on that. Because there were, it was sexual and all those different things that I was not feeling like doing, and it wasn't his fault, but he was feeling like there was something wrong with him.
Did you post that on your social?
I think I posted on my blog, yeah.
Okay, we'll link that in the show notes because I bet a lot of people would want to read that. Okay, we love to end with a homework assignment. I'm going to give you 3 homework assignments. I'm going to ask for 3. So can we get 1 homework assignment? This is something that anybody listening can go do the second they turn off the podcast to just begin to feel a real difference in their life. Somebody who is in their 20s or 30s, not in perimenopause, not in menopause, to prepare for the future. Somebody in peri, and then somebody fully in menopause. What's one thing they can do the second they turn off this podcast?
3 actionables?
Yeah.
For the 20 to 30, I would say get outside because you can do that. That's really easy and fun and actionable. I think for the perimenopause, I want you to go download the symptom tracker or find a symptom tracker and check off the boxes and see where you're at and be real about it. And if you have, 5 of those things and some of those are bothering you, make an appointment. And for the menopausal women out there, I think I would take a check-in on relationships and take a check-in on relationships with the, friends, people you care about, make sure you have that supportive community, and check in on your, if you have a love relationship or a partner, see how that's going sex-wise.
And know that there are solutions, which we've talked about in this podcast. Can you tell us a little bit in your own words about your documentary, about your book, about your social, like anything you want to shout out?
Yeah, I would love to. The documentary is The M Factor: Shredding the Silence on Menopause. It is premiered on PBS. We are doing community screenings now, and it's also still on PBS and pbs.org. We are doing community screenings across the world, which is really exciting. We give the film to women if they say, like, we've got a community of 10 to 100 to 800. We had 800 women in Washington State last week. It was so awesome to see.
I just love, I picture the energy in that kind of room.
Oh my gosh, it's palpable. It's unbelievable. We had it in New York 2 weeks ago, and it just made me, I was like, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to.
Why would you even try to not cry?
Because I was like,
these are the things that are supposed to make us cry.
I was like, you made a film. You've got to be serious. And I was like, because it was so appreciative. And there were men in the room and there were women in the room. And it was like all these people that were just grateful for facts, like simple, free facts. Like, how could we not have that for people? And so that was really important for me, that accessibility and just informing. And I've never felt like I've told a more important story in my life after all those years of journalism. So that was really a moment for me. And probably, like, I wish my mom was there to see it, but I know it's going to help so many other women that, when she didn't get help. So the community screenings have really taken my heart. Like, that's been really cool. I didn't expect that part. I knew we were going to be on PBS, and I knew that we were going to have a CME. It's accredited to help doctors, but not the community part. So that's been really cool. And then the book, How to Menopause, is a book that took me a few years to write, but I wanted something that was like the what to expect, the actionable. How do I menopause? Like, what is that? Like, I don't know what to do. Because so many women have said to me, like, I feel like I'm crazy and I feel like I'm alone. And you're neither one of those things. And there are solutions. And so what I did with the book is I put it into different categories. Like, here's where you are in perimenopause. Here's some of those bigger areas, whether it's sleep, whether it's your workout, whether it's nutrition, because I want people to have actionables that have nothing to do with hormones. So I wanted them to have the non-hormonal solutions too, and then also go into mindset and workplace, because I think we can't leave those out, as well as relationship.
Yeah, it's super, super comprehensive.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this conversation, for all of the incredible work you do. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
If you loved this episode, you will love the episode where I speak with Dr. Amy Shaw, called Daily Habits for Energy, Hormones, Inflammation, Longevity, and More. We get into a ton of incredible hormone-supporting routines and activities, but particularly what you can be doing at different stages of your menstrual cycle, during menopause, and more. I will link it in the show notes so you can listen next. Oh, just one more thing. It's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, a psychotherapist, or any other qualified professional.